let's explore a very important concept called executive functioning, which includes a series of cognitive processes that includes inhibitory control, the ability to control impulses and filter out distractions.
Sustained attention, the ability to focus and maintain attention for greater periods of time. Working memory, the ability to temporarily hold and manipulate information necessary to complete a task. And cognitive flexibility, the ability to adjust when we acquire new information, allowing us to think creatively, catch mistakes, and fix them, and gain a new perspective. Some people think of executive functions as the air traffic controller of the mind. As adults, we need this internal controller to help us multitask or keep several things in mind at the same time, behave appropriately, inhibit the impulse to respond inappropriately, and instead substitute a socially appropriate response, and respond appropriately to changing events or have cognitive flexibility to change our plans.
Children also need this controller in similar ways to respond appropriately to parents, teachers, and peers, to manage their strong feelings, to adapt to new situations, and to focus on the task at hand. The problem is that the brain areas underlying this internal air traffic controller are slowly developing. Thus, preschool children have some executive functions, but they also have a long way to go in their development. You see executive function in action when a 4-year-old wants to use a cabinet in the classroom as a house for his dinosaurs. The teacher tells him that he cannot do this. The cabinet is for supplies, not for play. The child inhibits his impulse to throw the dinosaur he's holding at the teacher because he's so mad that he has been thwarted.
He maintains his attention on his goal of finding a home for his animals rather than getting distracted by his emotions and falling apart.
He uses his working memory to recall that the children can use some old cardboard boxes in their play. He uses his cognitive flexibility to accept the box as an alternative solution to his problem of finding a home for his creatures. As the story about the boy and his dinosaurs illustrates, acquiring executive function skills is among the most important tasks of early childhood.
Executive function skills are necessary for both strong cognitive and social skills.
They are important to young children's capabilities to pay attention, to focus their cognitive efforts on the task at hand, to manage emotions, to get along with other children, to follow instructions, and to engage in other activities that are important to learning and social competence.
So what part of the brain is most involved in the development of these executive functions?
You guessed it, the prefrontal cortex, which plays a major role in planning and decision-making, and which coordinates thoughts and actions to meet a goal. There is a consensus among scientists that the prefrontal cortex continues developing through the 3rd decade of life.
Can you imagine? Our executive functioning skills are still developing into our mid-20s. Recent evidence suggests that there are more than 50 anatomically or functionally distinct parts of the prefrontal cortex.
The anterior cingulate, part of the prefrontal cortex, plays an important role in executive functioning. It lies between the frontal lobe of the cerebral cortex and emotion-related brain regions. It receives messages from many brain regions and coordinates all of the information to regulate both cognitive and emotional processes. The anterior cingulate is involved in controlling behavior, such as in challenging situations and making adjustments to behavior when a strategy is not working. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or DPC, and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, VMPC, also play important roles in executive functioning. These two parts of the prefrontal cortex work together to get things done. The DPC is one of the most sophisticated areas of the cerebral cortex involved in the planning, organization, and regulation of behavior, which sends a signal and says, "Hey, pay attention to this." While the VMPC, a part of the prefrontal cortex that is involved in the inhibition of behavior, including emotions, and decision-making, assesses the incoming information, and works to regulate behavioral responses. It allows children to increasingly filter out distractions and respond in a manner that is appropriate to the situation. This strengthens the skills of paying attention, managing emotions, focusing thinking, substituting immediate rewards for later ones, and responding socially in an appropriate manner. For example, if a child can delay gratification over and over again, for example, resist the impulse to play before completing homework, the brain networks that control delayed gratification will become stronger, which leads to better outcomes for children in the long run. Now let's think about the 4 features of executive functioning, starting with inhibitory control. Inhibitory control allows us to manage our impulses and override urges to act out in inappropriate behavior. For example, raising a hand when the teacher asks a question versus shouting out the answer. Children begin to develop inhibitory control between 3 and 4 years old as their prefrontal cortex becomes more developed, which helps them manage the expression of their feelings and plan how to act in ways that are more socially acceptable. For example, a child is frustrated that he can't find the right space for a puzzle piece, but instead of hurling it across the room, he asks the teacher for help. Inhibitory control also includes the ability to delay gratification. The ability to delay gratification is harder for some of you than others. The same is true for children, and it turns out that this ability to delay gratification can have implications for their long-term development. Have you heard of the Marshmallow test? This was an experiment in the early 1960s in which Professor Walter Mischel and his graduate students at Stanford University devised a test of a child's ability to delay gratification.
A child was seated in an empty room with a marshmallow on the table in front of her. The child was told if she did not eat the marshmallow, she would be given 2 marshmallows when the adult returned in 15 minutes. The children who were able to delay gratification later achieved higher levels of education and higher scores on their SAT exams. Their parents were also more likely to rate them as having greater ability to plan, handle stress, and respond to reason, exhibit self-control in frustrating situations, and concentrate without becoming distracted. The original study was published in 1972 and was known as the Marshmallow test.
One of the most interesting insights from this study was the strategies that the children who were able to delay gratification used to control their impulse to eat the marshmallow, which included sitting on their hands, singing to themselves, and purposefully looking away from the marshmallow. Just think about how hard it is for us as adults to inhibit our impulses, no less little children. Much of our work in nurturing the healthy development of children involves helping them learn this critical skill.
Inhibitory control begins to emerge toward the end of a child's first year and undergoes rapid development through the toddler years and into the preschool years. This pattern coincides with the age-related changes in the frontal lobe maturation and connectivity. However, inhibitory control continues to develop in later childhood and adolescence as the prefrontal cortex continues to mature during those years. Children benefit from inhibitory control because they're able to resist distractions, give a more considered response, and avoid jumping in with their first reaction. When children have better developed inhibitory control skills, they are more likely to comply with rules and follow directions. They tend to behave in socially competent ways in unsupervised situations and at school. Inhibitory control skills are positively associated with emerging math and literacy skills in preschool and kindergarten.
You can help children develop inhibitory control by playing games such as Simon Says. This helps children practice controlling their movement until Simon Says, providing consistency with expectations and routines, which help children cooperate and understand what the rules are. Being specific about what the expectations are. You need to put the truck away and come to the table for snack. Help the child understand which part of the behavior should be adjusted and give her some strategies to use. Helping children use their words to manage their behavior. We are familiar with urging young children to use words to manage their emotions rather than acting out their feelings. Say how you feel. However, it turns out that encouraging children to use their words can help them self-regulate in other situations, such as when they're trying to focus on a project. Encourage them to narrate what they are doing, or following instructions in a group task. Suggest they remind themselves about what the teacher said they should be doing. Children who have a hard time with inhibitory control tend to get more easily frustrated, have more meltdowns, and have a harder time collaborating with peers.
Sustained attention is the ability to maintain focused attention even in the face of distractions. Distractions might include what is going on in the room, the sounds and activities going on around the child.
Children can also be distracted by their own thoughts. For example, in circle time, the teacher's reading a book about a bear family having a picnic. The children are sharing their thoughts and answering questions about the story.
But one child raises his hand and says, "I love puppies." He is having trouble turning his brain off to his own internal thoughts and tuning in to the group task.
When children get easily distracted and can't maintain focus, it interferes with learning because learning is hard work. Learning requires focus so that children can take in the information being presented and use it in ways that help them be successful. For example, if a child is distracted from the teacher's book reading, this is a missed opportunity to build vocabulary and comprehension. If a child is distracted while the teacher provides instructions about how to use the glue to make the sparkles stick to the paper, he won't be able to master this skill or execute the activity in a way that helps him feel competent. The longer a child can focus on a task, the more persistent she is likely to be, and thus the more success she is likely to experience. Sometimes it can be helpful to encourage children to use self-talk to keep their attention focused on a task, or to have children who are working together talk with each other about the task and the role for each child in the project. Working memory is the capacity to temporarily hold and manipulate information necessary to complete a task. One example would be a waiter memorizing your order to give to the chef. Another is a child dipping his brush into the paint color to paint his picture. We need working memory skills to help us decide what information should be kept for a few minutes to complete a task or what should be stored long-term. For example, when introduced to someone at a party, the person's name might not need to be stored long-term unless it's someone you're likely to see again, such as your partner's boss, a parent at your child's school, or someone you're interested in dating. We have to work to decide what should be in our short-term and long-term memories.
In 1956, Brenda Miller wrote about the magical number 7 plus or minus 2 to describe how many pieces of information one could hold in one's short-term memory for about 20 seconds. While there have been more recent studies that show the number of items people can hold depends on their age and cognitive ability, neuroscientists still accept that the working memory can only hold a small chunk of information at a time. Then the brain has to quickly decide if it's going to hold on to that information to complete a task or move the information along to the long-term memory.
In the days before cell phones, working memory was needed to remember phone numbers. Phone numbers were actually designed to be 7 digits to make it easier for them to be remembered. How do children and adults manage to keep more information in mind than 7 items? Well, they do so by organizing the information in meaningful ways, such as knowing the routine to get ready for lunch so each step doesn't have to be remembered independently, and using memory aids, which teachers provide when they sing the cleanup song when it's time to put things away. Young children are not very good at spontaneously using these kinds of strategies, but they become more skilled at doing so as they move through the primary grade years. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to adapt our thinking when new information is provided, another very important element of executive functioning. Cognitive flexibility is critical for learning because children need to take into account new information that emerges as they play and explore in order to learn to solve problems as they arise. Picture a child who keeps putting a puzzle piece in a space that doesn't fit. You see cognitive flexibility at work when he starts to try to fit the piece into other spaces until he finds the correct one.
Perspective taking is the ability to understand something from someone else's point of view and is an important part of cognitive flexibility. As we discussed earlier, when going through the developmental milestones, starting at about 2 years old, children understand what they think, feel, and desire may be different from what others think, feel, and desire. By 4 years old, they can see the world from other people's perspectives. For example, if a 3-year-old opens a box that has pictures of candy on it, but he finds pencils inside, he will tell you that if a friend looks at this same box, he will know that there are pencils inside, not candy, because this is now what the 3-year-old knows. But by 4 years old, the child will say that if a friend looks at the box, he will think there's candy inside, because he can see the world from the other child's perspective. This awareness develops over time and is related to empathy and moral development.
Research also shows something very important, that children exhibit this ability to tune into other people's thoughts and feelings if their mothers talk about thoughts, wants, and feelings and provide explanations when correcting misbehavior. This means that these are strategies we should be using regularly with children in our care.